The following scenario is hypothetical and presented for educational and entertainment purposes. Imagine you are standing on a beach, toes sinking into the wet sand, looking out at the horizon. You probably think you're looking at the ocean. I hate to break it to you, but you're essentially just standing in a very large, very salty puddle on the edge of a continental porch. What makes this idea click is the moment you understand that these shallow edges of continents support disproportionate human and marine value. After that, it stops feeling like trivia and starts feeling like a story about why the sea feels familiar only from the shore. We call this the Continental Shelf, and as a scientist who spends too much time staring at sonar data and questioning my life choices, I can tell you it is the most deceptively important piece of real estate on the planet. It's the velvet rope of the deep sea, a geological VIP lounge that keeps the truly terrifying stuff at bay while providing us with everything from fish sticks to the very oxygen you're breathing right now. Technically speaking, the shelf is just the submerged perimeter of a continent. It's a gentle slope, usually ending at a depth of about 200 meters, which sounds deep until you realize the average depth of the rest of the ocean is around 3,700 meters. For millions of years, the ocean has been trying to swallow the land, and the shelf is the land's way of saying, not today. It is a sun-drenched, nutrient-rich playground that occupies less than 10% of the ocean's surface area, but hosts over 90% of its edible marine life. If the open ocean is a vast, watery desert, the continental shelf is the Times Square of the planet, bright, crowded, loud, and full of suspicious characters with too many legs. But here is where the mystery creeps in. Why does the Earth have these massive, flat underwater terraces at all? If you look at the bathymetry, the drop-off at the end of the shelf, the continental slope, is so sudden and so massive that it looks like the edge of a different world. We are living on the high ground, blissfully unaware that just a few miles past our favorite vacation spots, the ground literally falls away into a dark abyss that doesn't care about our sunscreen or our jet skis. We've mapped the surface of Mars better than we've mapped these slopes, which is quite an achievement for a species that prides itself on being connected. We are essentially clinging to the rim of a giant, dark bowl, and we've only just begun to realize that something very strange is happening right where the sunlight starts to fade. The sunlight begins to thin out, turning the water from a friendly turquoise to a brooding metallic indigo. This is the transition zone, the ecological border patrol where the rules of biology start to get a little creative. You see, the continental shelf isn't just a flat platform. It is a massive underwater buffet fueled by a process called upwelling. Imagine the deep, cold currents of the abyss hitting the wall of the continental slope like a freight train hitting a brick wall. This collision forces nutrient-rich water from the bottom, full of decomposed marine snow, which is a polite scientific term for fish poop and ancient dust, straight up to the surface. It's the ultimate recycling program. Without this vertical elevator of nutrients, the shelf would be a barren wasteland, but instead, it's a swirling soup of phytoplankton that produces nearly half of the world's oxygen. You aren't just looking at the water, you're looking at the planet's life support system, and it smells faintly of brine and mystery. But as a scientist, what keeps me up at night isn't just the biology, it's the physics of the shelf break. This is the first major climax of our geological story. At this precise point, the gentle 0.1 degree slope of the shelf suddenly plunges downward at an angle that would make a professional skier weep. It's a massive, silent cliffside that wraps around the entire planet like the seams on a baseball. In some places, these slopes are carved with gargantuan underwater canyons, some of which are larger and deeper than the Grand Canyon. They were carved during the ice ages when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, and today's beach was actually a forested valley. We are currently living in a temporary high tide era, walking on the roofs of submerged worlds. If you were to dive over that edge, you would leave the familiar world of sunlight behind in a matter of seconds. The pressure begins to mount, pushing against your lungs with the weight of a dozen SUVs. This is where the familiarity of the sea vanishes. On the shelf, we understand the rhythm of the tides and the behavior of the crabs. But at the edge of the slope, the water column begins to vibrate with a different kind of energy. There are internal waves, monstrous underwater ripples that can be hundreds of feet tall, moving silently beneath the surface, unseen by satellites or sailors. They crash against the continental wall, churning the depths and creating a chaotic, high-energy environment that shouldn't exist in such darkness. And right there, in the shadows of the canyons, we've started picking up signals that don't match our traditional models of ocean acoustics. Something is moving in the deep, and it seems to be using the shelf's edge as a highway. The deeper we go into these underwater canyons, the more the science starts to feel like a gothic horror novel written by someone who really likes salt. This is the realm of the continental rise, the giant, sloping pile of sediment at the base of the cliff where the continent's debris finally comes to rest. If the shelf is the porch, the rise is the messy pile of leaves at the bottom of the stairs. But these aren't just any leaves. They are massive fans of sand and mud, some stretching for hundreds of miles, created by turbidity currents. Think of these as underwater avalanches of liquid concrete, moving at speeds that could outrun a professional cyclist. They are the most powerful erosive forces on the planet that nobody talks about. One of these currents once snapped nearly a dozen transatlantic telegraph cables in a single afternoon back in 1929, effectively silencing the communication between two continents because a piece of the shelf decided it didn't want to stay put anymore. As a scientist, I find it hilarious and slightly terrifying that we build our entire global internet infrastructure, the very cables carrying this text to you, across these unstable, gravity-defying slopes. We are literally threading the needle of a geological ticking time bomb. But it's not just about the threat of a digital blackout. These sediment fans are the ultimate time capsules. They trap organic carbon by the gigaton, burying it deep beneath the seabed. If the continental shelf is the planet's lung, the continental rise is its carbon sink. It's the Earth's way of sweeping its excess greenhouse gases under the rug. Without this geological trash disposal, our atmosphere would be a sweltering greenhouse, and we'd all be living in a climate that feels like a permanent steam sauna. Yet, here is the second major climax of our investigation. We've recently discovered that these passive piles of mud are actually alive with chemical energy. Cold seeps, places where methane and other gases leak out of the seafloor, are dotted along the margins like hidden vents in a laboratory. Around these seeps, we find entire ecosystems that don't need the sun. Giant tube worms, translucent crabs, and bacteria that eat rock thrive in the pitch black. It's an alien civilization right in our backyard. We used to think life was a top-down affair, starting with the sun hitting the shelf. Now we realize the shelf's foundation is being powered by the very core of the planet. And as we map these seeps, we've noticed a disturbing pattern. They are starting to hiss. As the ocean warms, the methane ice clathrates hidden in the shelf's slope is beginning to melt, and the bubbles are rising toward the surface like a giant carbonated soda bottle about to blow its cork. The mystery has shifted from how does this support us to how long will it stay stable. We are standing on the edge of a balcony that is starting to groan under its own weight. And as the pressure within the sediment builds, we've detected a series of low-frequency hums emanating from the deepest canyons, sounds that don't come from whales, ships, or tectonic plates. It's a rhythmic, mechanical pulsing that seems to synchronize with the tides. It's as if the continent itself is breathing, or perhaps something much larger is waking up underneath the very foundation of our world. As we descend into the final layer of this submerged mystery, we reach the abyssal plain, the true floor of the deep ocean, where the continental margin finally yields its secrets to the eternal dark. If the shelf is the porch and the slope is the staircase, the abyssal plain is the vast, cold basement of the world. But here's the kicker. This basement is currently being reshaped by the very things we do on the sunlit shelf above. We like to think of the continental shelf as a protective barrier, a geological buffer zone that keeps the ocean's chaos at arm's length. In reality, it is a high-speed conveyor belt. Everything we drop, spill, or discard on that shallow edge eventually slides down those massive canyons, accelerated by the sheer gravity of the continental slope until it lands here, thousands of meters below. We aren't just visiting the shore, we are actively plumbing the depths with our footprint, often without even realizing we've left the sand. As a scientist, I find a twisted sort of humor in our arrogance. We've spent centuries mapping the stars, yet we are only just now realizing that the continental shelf acts as a global lung, heart, and kidneys combined. It filters the water, regulates the temperature, and provides the biological spark for the rest of the planet. It is the most crowded, productive, and volatile piece of geography on Earth, and yet we treat it like a static backdrop for our summer photos. The familiarity we feel at the shore is a biological illusion, a comfort blanket woven from sunlight and salt spray that blinds us to the gargantuan shifting machinery working just a few miles out. The shelf isn't just a place, it's a process, a living boundary that is constantly negotiating between the stability of the land and the wild, crushing power of the deep. This brings us to the ultimate climax of our investigation. Those rhythmic, low-frequency pulses I mentioned, our latest sensors suggest they aren't just geological settling. They are the sound of the shelf flexing under the weight of a changing ocean. As sea levels rise and the mass of the water increases, the actual crust of the continental shelf is bowing downward like a wooden plank under a heavy foot. This flexing is opening up new cracks in the ancient sediment, releasing gases that haven't seen the light of day since the dinosaurs were dodging meteors. We are essentially poking a sleeping giant with a very short stick. The familiar blue horizon isn't a wall, it's a veil. And as that veil thins, we are starting to see that the ocean doesn't just end where the land begins. It is slowly, methodically reclaiming the very porch we're standing on. The question isn't whether the shelf matters. We've proven it's the most valuable real estate in the galaxy. The real mystery is what happens when the porch finally breaks. We've spent so long looking out at the waves, wondering what's over the horizon, that we forgot to look down at what's holding us up. The shelf is shifting, the canyons are humming, and the abyss is starting to breathe back. It makes you wonder, if the sea feels familiar only from the shore, what will it feel like when the shore is no longer where we left it? Would you like me to generate a high-resolution, sonar-style image of these mysterious underwater canyons and the breathing continental shelf?